Hello, Bobby Torres of Box Recording here to share with you 3 rarely talked about heavy drum mixing tips that I feel make a huge difference. So without wasting any time, let's dive right into it with tip number 1. High pass your kick drum. Yes, you heard me correctly. Use a high pass filter on your kick drum. Now, most people, when they hear this, they think, why would you high pass your kick drum? Don't you want as much low frequency punch and energy as possible? Now, yes, you do want low end punch on your kick drum. I prefer to keep my kick drum sitting lowest in my mix below my bass guitar. But here's the truth. Most energy below 40 or 30 hertz on your kick drum is just junk frequency that's eating up a ton of headroom on your mix in general that you don't even really need. It doesn't add any extra power to your kick and you don't even really hear it. It just, like I said, takes up headroom and it's a waste of energy, which makes mastering very difficult. So I prefer to just get rid of it throughout the mixing process to help make mastering easier when I get to the mastering stage. So for example, since I like to keep things nice and simple, I don't roll off the frequencies on my kick drum itself. I prefer to do it on my drum bus, mainly because it keeps my workflow nice and simple. And also it helps remove any extra low end on my floor tom that I might not want as well. So it's just an extra precautionary measure. So if we look here, I have my drum submix and I have a simple stock EQ on my drum submix, pulling out a little bit of lower mids just to clear up the mid range. And I'm rolling off all frequencies below 40 hertz, which might seem extreme, but on this particular mix, I didn't really need any of those frequencies. So just to show you how transparent this actually is, I'm gonna play the mix back and I'm gonna intermittently bypass my high pass filter on my drum mix, and you're not even gonna hear an actual difference, which is what you want. Again, we're creating extra headroom and saving energy so we can get our mix louder without doing anything to the mix as far as sound is concerned. In other words, we're just making our lives easier. So let's take a quick listen and see what we got. So if you were paying attention while I was bypassing my high pass filter, it had no sonic penalty on my drum mix. But again, it was saving me headroom on my master fader. So when it came time to master my track, I have extra room to play with and I'm just getting rid of stuff that I don't need. So that's tip number 1, high pass your kick drum and or drum submix, which of course will affect your kick drum and any other low frequency content on your drum tracks. Okay, and drum mixing tip number 2 that I rarely hear people mention is using a transient designer on your toms when you're mixing live drums. Now, if you've ever mixed live drums, you probably know by now, especially with heavier music, that cymbal bleed is a major pain in the ass, especially if you're working with a drummer that's not necessarily a balanced or a hard hitter as far as the shells on their kit is concerned. So in other words, what a lot of drummers will tend to do is hit their cymbals really hard, and when a fast fill will come by, they'll just kind of graze across the kit, and what you end up with is a lot more cymbal bleed in your tom mics than actual tom sound coming through your tom mics, especially onto quicker, softer hits. Now, what I prefer to do is go in and cut out all dead space on my tom tracks. If you look here, I have 2 tom tracks, a rack tom and a floor tom, and that certainly helps with cymbal bleed. But even with that being said, you're still gonna get some quick cymbal bleed during the actual tom hit itself. And a transient designer can definitely help save the day in situations like this, because a transient designer is sort of like a compressor, except it adds extra transient or reduces transient depending on how you're using it in a much more transparent and subtle way. So if we listen to that chorus one more time, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to actually bypass my transient control plugins or my transient designers on my toms, and I want you to pay close attention to the tom tracks. Let's take a listen. Okay, let's focus in on that last fill. not bad, but the toms sound kind of muffly. I really don't have too much of a problem with cymbal bleed here, at least in this section of the song, but the toms just sound kind of not clear enough. They kind of just sound too boxy and too muffly, and it's not really an EQ thing. So by simply taking a basic Transient Designer plugin, or in this case, I'm using Transient Control by Metric Halo. Now, I'm a Pro Tools user, and unfortunately, Pro Tools does not come with a stock Transient Designer plugin. If you're a Reaper user, Reaper comes with a free Transient Control plugin, so give that a shot, and I think Studio One does as well. So more than likely, your DAW has one stock, so you don't even have to spend any extra money. I'm a Pro Tools user, so I did have to spend extra money. But with that being said, this is a great plugin and I use it all the time. And all I have it set to is just to reduce some of the sustain of the original sound and just bring up some of the transient. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bypass or re-engage the plugins on my rack tom and my floor tom. And let's take a quick listen to that same tom fill. Much clearer, much more concise, and much more in your face without sounding obnoxious. Now I just bypassed them again. Let's take a listen. So as you can tell, just by using this simple tool, it's helping to bring my toms to the forefront and to pop out of the mix without extra cymbal bleed and without having to do anything crazy like insane volume automation on every single tom hit. So that's tip number 2. Use a Transient Designer on your toms if you're working with live drums and you're having issues getting them to cut through, especially when dealing with excess cymbal bleed, which we all face. Okay, and this brings me to tip number 3. Do not hesitate to write in volume automation on your overhead tracks. Now, again, on the topic of live drums, you may know by now that the problem with live drum tracks is that a lot of times your hi-hat will absolutely destroy your mix. You'll be mixing a band, you'll send the band the rough mix, and the drummer will say, "Can you bring up my cymbals?" Okay, no problem. You bring up his cymbals, and all of a sudden the hi-hat is taking your head off. You go into the tracks, you try to EQ out all your harsh frequencies, and before you know it, you're just removing all of the cymbals from your mix in general. It's a very common problem. Now, the best way to fix this, to be completely honest with you, is to record your cymbals right in the first place. That's why I prefer to spot mic cymbals. I find that it gives me much more control over my cymbals, and I don't treat my cymbal mics as overheads. I treat them as individual cymbal mics, or at least I'll mic my cymbals in pairs. It's more of a modern metal recording philosophy than a classic recording philosophy like what I learned in school. Now, if you're anything like me, you might be mixing projects that you did not record yourself. So maybe you didn't have control over where the engineer placed the mics on recording day. So what do you do about this annoying hi-hat issue in these situations? The answer is simple. Write in simple volume automation. Now, if you look here, I have this track that's called Sims. This track here is actually a VCA track. In other words, no actual audio is going through it. It's simply a controller that's controlling the volume of my 2 overhead tracks. I only have 2 overhead tracks in this mix, an overhead left and an overhead right, and unfortunately I ran into the same problem that we all face where the hi-hat was just too loud in the mix and the drummer was slamming on the hi-hat and not necessarily hitting his crashes all that hard. So this might seem like a lot of work, but it's actually pretty easy, especially if you recorded your production to a click track. What I like to do in these situations is go in and just boost the volume on the downbeats of certain cymbal crashes that I want to cut through, and then keep the cymbal volume at a conservative level when he's smashing the hi-hats. So let's take a listen to that chorus riff once more, and I want you to pay close attention to the cymbal sound as it is now with my volume automation. Okay, the hi-hat isn't taking your head off. You hear all of the crash cymbals nice and clear. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna temporarily delete this automation, and I want you to take a listen to what the cymbals sound like without any volume automation at all. Now, you might notice that the hi-hat is at a decent level, but those crashes are just a little too subtle when they should be accenting those sections of the riff or the chorus here. So by me going in there and adding that extra volume automation, I'm bringing out those parts of the drum performance that I want the listener to pay attention to, but without the hi-hat killing my mix. Again, if you record your cymbals right in the first place, you won't have this issue, but the truth is, in the real world, you'll be dealing with this a whole lot because most people, for some reason, opt to use a traditional pair of overheads without paying much attention to this hi-hat problem. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to go insane. Just remember that volume automation, even though it's not that fun, it's not a sexy topic, can really, really help in a situation like this where you want to bring out certain areas of the drum performance while reducing the overall brittleness and brutalness of the hi-hat. So there you have it. Those are 3 drum mixing techniques that I rarely hear people talk about online that I feel make a huge difference. And in my opinion, all 3 of them can really help bring your mix to the next level with minimal tweakage and minimal fuss. So I'm curious to know, do you implement these techniques currently within your mixes? Or have you never even thought of using these 3 techniques? Leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know. I'd love to hear your opinion. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload more weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts, mugs, and other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. Now, just like I demonstrated in this video, a lot of times when it comes to achieving professional results, it has nothing to do with gear. It's all your approach and your workflow. In other words, I don't want you wasting money on equipment you don't need. This is why I put together my 5-step guide to better heavy mixes, where I outline key mixing techniques that I feel make a massive difference when it comes to dialing in a pro level mix or production out of a home studio. You can download the guide for absolutely free. Again, there's a link below in this video's description box. Until next time, happy mixing.